Hey everyone, I'm David Aragona here for the January 31st edition of Horses to Watch. On Horses to Watch, every week we take a look back at races from the last week, trying to find horses that had trips that prevented them from achieving an optimal result, maybe runners to bet back in the future, but really just the exercise of doing some trip handicapping, making notes on horses that you think were prevented from achieving a higher result and could be ones that are worth following down the line, whether it's their next start or a couple starts down the line, depending on where they show up in the future. This week, I'm going to take a look back at two races from last week, one from Gulfstream Park and one from Oaklawn. And I'll say at the start of this show that neither one of these horses are necessarily ones that I'm itching to bet back next time because they're two horses who are very similar types of runners. They're deep closers who ran into trouble trying to make runs from the back of the pack. And those types, I think you generally need to be a little bit careful with because horses that are those deep closing runners need more racing luck than horses with other running styles, and they just tend to find more trouble. So I think when you're watching trips like this, you want to just be wary when these horses show back up. You want to make sure it is the right kind of condition, but also the right pace scenario and field size for them to achieve their best result. So with that being said, let's take a look at our first replay of the week. It is the Pegasus World Cup Turf, one of the future races from last weekend at Gulfstream Park on Saturday, race 12 on that Saturday card. We'll break these runners from the gate, and we're going to focus on the number 5 Web Slinger. There are a few trips that you could focus on in this race. Web Slinger, I think, definitely one of them. I'll talk about a couple of other horses that may have had some trouble during the running, but I really wanted to hone in on Web Slinger because he is a horse that, if you've been watching a lot of this horse's trips throughout his career, he tends to find a lot of trouble. And that, I think, is just indicative of horses that have his running style coming from towards the back of the pack. You need that racing luck. You have to avoid going wide around the turns or encountering traffic coming through these large fields. And Web Slinger just seems to find a lot of that trouble. A lot of those pitfalls are common for Web Slinger. And I think we saw it again here in this Pegasus World Cup turf on Saturday. Unsurprisingly, he's towards the back of the pack early. He'll be off the screen for a good portion of this trip. I'll pick him up about the half-mile pole again. But on the backstretch, I'll just discuss a couple of other runners. I mean, obviously, the winner of this race, the number 9, Warm Heart, got a fantastic ride and trip from Ryan Moore, saving ground every step of the way. Some others that you might want to pay attention to are the number 12, Catnip, who was in the 2 to 3 path throughout, never towards the inside, and made an early bid to be up front, backed off, and then tried to come on again, making that 3 wide run around the far turn. He ran pretty well, especially considering that the 3 other horses that were involved in the Superfecta all rode the rail throughout. And you can pick up Web Slinger now. He's about 2 from the right of your screen, just to the outside of the number 1. And the number 4 and the number 1, they're going to finish 2nd and 4th in this race coming up the rail. But number 5, Web Slinger, highlighted right here, you'll see him try to ankle out, and he just gets cut off right there by the number 4, I'm Very Busy, as he sharply angles off the rail under Irad Ortiz, and it just basically robbed Web Slinger of that momentum. He then had to hop over horse's heels to angle to the far outside, and you'll see him come back into the screen as they cross the wire. He's actually finishing best of all to get up for, I believe, 6th in this race, just running on belatedly after the race is over, and I think we've seen that before from Web Slinger. He's got the talent to be competitive with these horses. It's just a matter of the trips not working out for him, and I think Edgar Zayas just found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time at the top of the stretch of that race. Another horse that some people thought didn't have the ideal trip in that Pegasus World Cup turf was Integration, the number 3 in the replay that we just watched. Now, I thought Tyler Gaffaleone tried to make all the right moves on that horse, was saving ground, trying to follow the eventual winner, Warm Heart, around the far turn. He just kind of developed a gap between himself and that runner and couldn't really follow that horse up the inside, tried to angle out, and just found himself in a tight spot for a good 16th to an 8th of a mile. I guess he came through the stretch, and Integration seems like the kind of horse that really needs to get himself out into the clear to accelerate and produce that quick turnover that we saw of his stride in both the Hill Prince and the that race at Colonial Downs over the summer. So I think all of these horses, Catnip, Integration, and especially Web Slinger, are ones that could have achieved a better result if they had either more ground-saving trips or less traffic. Web Slinger, though, would be the one that I think we've just seen this from more often than not, him having this trouble. And I think eventually, if the trip works out, he's got one due coming for him. He could be a horse that at some point in time could achieve a victory in this kind of race at a bigger price. Let's move on to the other race I want to talk about from last week. It was a Sunday allowance race from Oaklawn. It was one of two divisions for this condition on the Sunday card. This one, race six, it's an optional claiming 100,000. Nominators of two lifetime is the allowance condition, going the 1 mile distance with the short stretch at Oaklawn for 3-year-olds. Let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on the number 7 footprint, and you'll see right at the start here he gets squeezed back between runners and just finds himself losing any momentum that he might have had to gain at the start and back in last. He's going to find himself a good 5-6 lengths behind everybody else in this field moving into the clubhouse turn. So he is a closer by nature, but I don't think the connections wanted him to be this far back after encountering that trouble at the break. But it's a discussion that I think is worth having about, while this horse did have obvious trouble during the running, how much did it really affect him, considering what went right for him and what might have gone wrong for some of his competitors? And I think it's worthwhile to compare his trip to the horse that actually broke just to his inside, and that is the number 6, who was a Keith DeSoma runner, also in this race. That runner, Next Level, it just goes a little bit wider around the far turn, whereas Julien Leparoux on the number 7 footprint, I think, makes a lot of the right moves after that poor start. That is him now 2 from the back, advancing up the inside, and he's definitely a horse that doesn't need to be asked to get back into the race. He's moving up under his own power, advancing towards the inside, and he clearly has run at this point. Now, the pace was honest, and this field starts to bunch up as the leaders begin to slow down, moving around the far turn, and you could see Footprint has a ton of run underneath him. Julien Leparoux maneuvering with a lot of horse, just nowhere to go at this point in time. Meanwhile, the number 6 Next Level, that's him in the green and yellow sleeves up on the outside. He's going to get the jump on Footprint coming to the top of the stretch and actually range up like he's going to win this race. Whereas the horse highlighted here, the number 7 Footprint, he had to wait for him along the inside, but does save that ground, is able to cut the corner, and he has a clear path coming through the stretch until about right here when things tighten up on him a little bit at the 16th pole. Briefly, Julien Leparoux is to snatch him a little bit, not really losing that much momentum, comes through at the end and just barely loses in a photo. I think you can make the argument that Footprint should have won this race. I mean, given the way the trips worked out, if not for that trouble at the start, given the way the pace worked out, he was supposed to win on this day. And it really was not Julien Leparoux's fault. I thought he did everything right, gave this horse the right kind of ride after that unlucky start, just couldn't quite get there at the end. But who really had the tougher trip, Footprint or that number 6 horse, Next Level, who had to go wide around the far turn, was pushed even wider in upper stretch by a horse that was bearing out a little bit? Maybe Next Level hung a little bit at the end. I think that's a fair statement because it did appear that he was going to win the race with about an eighth of a mile to go. But I think you can't underestimate ground loss in these situations, and Footprint did get to save more ground than Next Level. So while I think the inclination is to upgrade a horse like Footprint next time, this was the slower division of these two races. It didn't get that high of a speed figure, and it's not that clear that he really ran that much better than some others, even though he is the horse that had the obvious trouble. So what I'm trying to say is I think it's an interesting race to highlight and brings up some interesting talking points about what you want to look for in trips and upgrading horses or downgrading the next time out. Footprint, it's more of a discussion point horse, not necessarily one that I think you definitely want to bet where he shows up next time. So those are all the horses to watch for this week's show. If you want to follow these horses or maybe some other runners from the videos I highlighted this week or other races, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com under your account. You will get email notifications when these horses run back in the future if they're in your stable, or you can go into DRF Formulator or Timeform US and enter your trip notes for these horses in these specific races, and those trip notes will show up in the horses' running lines when they run back in the past performances next time out. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week. We'll be back with another batch of races to look at next week.